In today's episode, I want to talk about slow productivity and a particular element of slow productivity, which is seasonality. Now, this episode is based, if you're on YouTube, you'll see, is based on this book. This is a book by Cal Newport called Slow Productivity: the Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. And I'm a particular fan of the kinds of strategies that you find inside this book in terms of managing the academic career, managing the way in which you work, because it is much more nuanced than the kinds of advice we might often find, like top line internet advice. Anyway, so this is Cal Newport's book, Slow Productivity. And I'm going to just so he has 3 principles of slow productivity. 1, do fewer things. 2, work at a natural pace. And 3, obsess over quality. And I want today to talk about number 2, work at a natural pace, although I've called this seasonality. So why am I interested in seasonality and how is it going to help you? One of the barriers to people implementing writing advice in their academic career is the fact that people are so dogmatic when they encounter advice. So my advice to you, if you want to establish a rock solid writing habit, is to write every day. Now, I say it like that because it's not snippy to say every day of your working week if you're a full-time 1.0 employee. Obviously, that does not trip off the tongue. But that's what I mean. I mean, according to your contractual status, write every working day of your week. Okay? So not the weekends, not holidays, not evenings, not vacations. Every day of your working day, do some writing. Now, when I say that advice, people recoil, they find it hard to imagine themselves turning up with that level of consistency. And immediately they start coming onto the back foot and coming out with all the reasons why that won't work for them. Now, forget writing, okay? Just forget that as an idea for now. Establishing a habit requires you to do something repetitively at a steady frequency. Basically, that's the definition of having a habit. So you can't be sporadic. If you're sporadic, it's not a habit. If you're doing 8 hours every second Friday, that is not a writing habit. It's not. And you will not produce the same amount of work than if you had done 30 minutes every day for 2 weeks. So getting the writing habit consistent is critical for your long-term career success. Now, why do I like the seasonality idea that he has? So this idea of working at a natural pace, because I think that in some way helps me explain what I mean when I'm talking about consistency. Because the way that is often interpreted by academics is to turn up every day, foot on the accelerator, 100 miles an hour, maximum intensity every single day for their allocated time slot forever. That is not consistency. Consistency is turning up every day. That's the consistency part. And so what seasonality introduces is a more forgiving and more humane what is the word I'm looking for? Tempo of intensity, so that we are turning up every day, but we're not always on the accelerator pedal at 100 miles an hour. We're not always at maximum intensity. So whilst our habit remains consistent, our intensity waxes and wanes over certain periods of time. And so if we take the academic calendar, There are, as you all know, certain times in the academic year that things will be more intense for you in other areas of your job and then less intense for you in other areas of your job. And so we want to work with that intensity that is already baked in to the academic calendar. Now, depending on your life circumstances, so whether you have a family, whether you have small children, the kinds of roles that you play in a department, the kinds of teaching obligations you have, and how that differs from semester to semester, all of these things map out your own graph of intensity. Now, yours is going to be different to mine, but I want to, so we're not always talking in abstract terms. I want to give you an idea of what my graph of intensity would look like through the academic year. Because when we know that, when we know there are times when I'm hanging in there by my fingernails, we know we can still turn up to do our writing, but we can take the foot off the intensity. We don't stop. That's when you break the habit. But we're still consistent, but we're not at maximum intensity in those periods where you're already maxed out in other areas of your job. So for example, my academic year, if we take it semester by semester, my best semester, so to give you some context, my teaching was the same. So I had the same number of teaching hours throughout the semesters. So I didn't have one semester that was very heavily weighted and one semester that was free. I literally had the same teaching hours, different teaching, but the same teaching amount all of the year. So when you look at my timetable, it would look like I had a very consistent type of experience in terms of intensity. But of course, the delivery of the teaching is but one element of a very big job. And so just because my teaching remained consistent doesn't mean everything else around it remained consistent. So my experience of my own academic career was that the first semester, I had maximum capacity. So that was a time where I should be consistent, i.e., turning up every day, but also have my foot hard on the pedal, because that's where I have the maximum bandwidth. And then, of course, within that semester, there would be times when I would be grading as well as teaching, and I would have administration and all of those other things. Okay, but they were within my wheelhouse of capacity. So first semester was really good for me for writing, September to Christmas. And then January, in my particular discipline and department, we didn't have examinations because our teaching was not semesterized. So January was a great month. It was no teaching and no exams, no grading. So I was able to really hammer January with research, because I've also had a bit of a break at Christmas, and so I'm lots of energy. First couple of weeks of February, okay, but March and the last 2 weeks of February were like Armageddon in my university for whatever reason. It doesn't matter why that is. It just was. It just was. And there was no brain space for anything. You were just hanging in by your fingernails till the whole thing was over. So in that particular stretch of time, I had minimum capacity for writing. So what I would do was I would be consistent. I would turn up every day, but the intensity of what I was doing was lessened. So I certainly wasn't starting any new projects in that period of time. I was finishing up things where I'd already done the intellectual work. I was doing easier writing tasks instead of the hardest type of writing task. But I was still keeping my habit going. So when I talk about consistency, that is what I mean when I'm talking about academic writing. And then, of course, after that particular period of time, so then teaching semester is over after Easter, and then it's grading exams. Now, that was a great time for me to write. I had hundreds of examination books. I taught a first year compulsory module with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students on it. I had hundreds of examination books to mark. It's not because I had a small amount of grading, but what I didn't have was anything else going on because everybody else is busy grading. So no meetings, no policies, no new things, no nothing. It's like it's grading time now. And so in the time where I was waiting for my exam books to arrive to me, I was doing my research and my writing. And in my experience, my colleagues were not doing this. They were in this kind of hiatus of, well, it's grading now. So even though I haven't actually got any grading, I'm going to not do any research either because now we're grading. So that was a great time. And then, of course, when the books came in, I would still do my consistent writing first thing, and then I would grade the exam book. So again, didn't break the habit, but perhaps my intensity while I was grading was dramatically lowered. And then I'm taking my holidays. Once exam boards are over, I'm having some vacation time, and then of course it's back into resits and then back again. But still my capacity over the summer much higher than it would have been in, let's say, February or March. So my intensity was waxing and waning according to everything else that's going on around me, but I am consistently turning up to do work. If you can maintain consistency, the productivity takes care of itself, because it is not about turning up at 100% with maximum intensity for 12 months of the year, every single day that you're writing. That leads to burnout. So this idea of working at this natural pace, and because academia is like we're back at school, it's seasonal, it's structured in a kind of way that it already maps that out for you. But I think you have to be conscious yourself about what your particular calendar looks like and what your particular spread of responsibilities looks like. That there are times when you have more capacity and less capacity. There are times you can work at a higher pace and a less higher pace. The important line to toe, though, is that you are writing every day. And when I say writing, I mean reading, taking notes, structuring, drafting, editing, all of the component parts that go up into producing a piece of research. You're doing that every day. And that's for many and various reasons, including keeping your writing identity alive and keeping the habit nice and solid. So that's the important point. So when I come along with my writing method and say you're going to write every day, I don't want you to hear maximum intensity every day for 12 months. You will burn out in about 3 years doing that. When people do it, and people do it when they're young in particular, they do it. I mean, I have so many clients who've worked like that to get tenure, and then the minute they have it, they lie down in a ditch and they can't do any writing ever again, because they have this really dysfunctional relationship with writing where it's just only maximum stress and intensity can get them to move. And they no longer have that feeling because they no longer feel losing their job. And then they can't do anything. And we don't want to start down that track with your writing habit. And if you're already on that track with your writing habit, now is the time to break it. It is about consistency, not intensity. So sometimes you will be more intense, sometimes you will be less intense with your efforts and focus and the difficulty of the things that you're trying to do. So that's my kind of take on Cal Newport's seasonality. Now, I want to give you some of his takes. So when he looks at seasonality, this is what he has to say. What does it mean to work seasonally? To him, it means that things take longer because you're not at maximum intensity all the time. I mean, I just disagree with that premise, because nobody can work at maximum intensity all the time without burning out. And then if you're a person who does binge and bust writing, where you work at maximum intensity, great, you get that article written really quickly, but then you have to lie down for 6 months to recover. Obviously, you're not getting more work done. because you just had to have the recovery time. So I'm not sure that things do take longer. But anyway, this is what he says: take longer. Be prepared for things to take longer. Make a 5-year plan. I'm all about the 5-year Stalinist plan. And I've already talked about that in a previous episode and why that is so important, right? Because we need to elongate our timelines. Because partly why we feel unsatisfied with working with seasonality is because we think, well, I'm falling behind. I'm not getting as much done. But what you are getting done over a longer period stacks up to so much more than you think it's going to. You need a longer time frame than just the next 12 months. I cannot say that enough for so many reasons in academia. He says that you need to double your timeline. Now, if you're working with me, that is not something you have to do, because if you're working with me, you know exactly how long things take you, because I have trained you to know those things. So this is for people who have no idea how long a thing is going to take them. Whatever you think it is, double it. Schedule slow seasons. So here and he's an American academic. So for the non-American audience, Americans have usually a contract of 10 months. So they're actually only employed and therefore only paid for 10 months of the year. And that means for 2 months, i.e. July and August, they are free of any obligation to their employer. The employer cannot give them any work to do that because they're not paying them. And now, I know the way academics work it over there is usually that they have their salary fractured, so it actually spreads over 12 months, but they're actually only paid for 10 months of the year. And that means, obviously, if you're in that position, your summer is your own, and that can be your slow season. That can be one that you've scheduled. Now, that doesn't quite translate internationally, where you're not in a situation where you can take 2 months off because you're not paid for them. Because, for example, in the UK, academic contracts are for the whole year, and therefore your university is still expecting you to hop to it and attend 1 million open days and do lots of nonsense things over the summer months. So it's not as simple as just take the summer off, right? So you have to be a bit more, I think, strategic about when your slow season is. So, for example, my slow season was February and March. That was my slow season. That was definitely where my foot had to come off the pedal, because I just couldn't manage very intense research alongside all the other stuff that was occurring at that particular point in the year. And again, not about teaching. So when is your slow season going to be? And also think about, and this I do like much better, implementing seasonality to much smaller scale. So on a daily, weekly, monthly scale, where you think, okay, today is going to be an easier day, right? I'm not going to work today with maximum intensity in this writing session. But it's not just about your writing. It's also about your teaching and your admin, right? It's not just about one component element of the job. So figure out when you can include slower days in the semester time, in particular when things are really frantic. And I mean, I definitely used to organize my teaching in such a way that I had reading weeks, for example, where no reading weeks existed within the actual formal timetable, by giving the students other things to do in that period of time. So, and that was me essentially implementing this advice before I'd ever heard it. So that was me creating a gap, a breather, some slow seasonality in what would otherwise have been like starting on the sprint gun in September and never stopping running until the 15th of December or whatever. So early in November, I had a slower week. And then the thing is, then I would speed right up. So I would then, do things my colleagues wouldn't do, which was set assignments to be returned inside semester. And I would mark them inside the semester, which would leave January free. So again, then I went up in intensity. So these are the kinds of things you have to really be mindful about. And this is why planning is so important, because if you are not a person who thinks like this or does this kind of thing, what happens is you begin the year with, let's imagine the tank's at 100%. Let's just imagine that. By December, your tank is at maximum 40%. And then you've still got to get through to the end of June on 40% of your tank. And then like by February, you're at 20%. And then you're basically on vapors for the rest of the semester. And then you kind of lie down a little bit in the summer, and then it all starts again. If that's how you are going through your academic career, you probably don't have a lot of energy for writing, deep thinking, deep work, focus, creativity, intellectual endeavor, because basically you're always operating at a deficit. And that is what we want to stop. And the way you stop that is nothing to do with the environment that you're in, and everything to do with the way in which you operate in that environment, so that you're doing it mindfully, that you're thinking about seasonality. Now, this was not, I was always doing this. I was always doing this. And maybe that's because I have a chronic illness. And so I am much more aware of the need to manage my energies and my body than other people. So if you're a very healthy person and you never had anything like that, and you're just like, okay, we're in fifth gear and we're just going to keep going now until, that is when you collapse in a heap. Okay. So perhaps there is an advantage to chronic illness after all. I was definitely more mindful of managing my peaks and my troughs throughout the academic year. So this is something I really want you to consider. So your homework after this episode is to take 15 minutes and think about how your year unfolds. And if you're quite senior in the job or mid-career, you can see year after year after year, what are the patterns of intensity? And then start thinking about, okay, this is the high intensity. Where am I going to place the lower intensity while still maintaining a writing habit?